So my plate has been drying for pretty much 2 days. I would let it dry during the afternoon and then wrap it up at night. And then I may, while it was still plastic, I made the first cut. And then on the second day, I made a second cut and it popped off real nice. I would also let it dry upside down on the second day. If you touch this, it's not tacky at all, which is great because we really don't want to have any trimmings reattach themselves as we're trimming. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to need to do before we recenter this is find out how deep our plate is. Remember, we're going to want to have, probably a 1/4 inch. And we're going to take the depth in 2 different places. We're going to do the middle, where it should be the thinnest. And I'm just kind of looking for that needle tool just to poke out. I don't know if you can see how it's kind of looking like a pimple. So I'm going to measure, that's how deep it is. So I'm going to make a mark. Okay. So that's the center. All right. And now I'm going to measure right where the foot rim is going to go, or foot ring, I should say. Okay. And like I said, that's much deeper. So once again, I'm going to make a mark there so that I know how deep to trim. Okay. All right. So I'm going to center down here. Try to get a rough center as close as I can before I start trying to fine tune it. Now I'll do another video where you can use a chuck to do this one, which I think is pretty nice, especially if you want to trim all the way down to the rim. All right. Okay, so we're just off a little bit in this direction. Now, I had some problems when I flipped this over. It slipped and I dropped it. So that's why it's got some bumps and grooves here. And it's almost centered. Right there. Okay. And that should be good. Let's see. That works for me. All right, so I'm going to get some lugs to hold it in place. This should be the same color clay body that you're throwing with. It doesn't have to be, but it makes life a lot easier if you don't have to remove or sponge out color before it dries. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out where I want my foot ring to be. Okay, so as we trim, we always start with the outside first, so we're going to remove this section here, establish how high we want that foot ring to be, and then we'll go through to the center. If you're making a really large plate, then you might have a second foot ring in the middle. Some really big plates and platters will have those, okay? And you can always include it if you want. So you're going to use the standard loop tools that came in your kit. These are a couple different ones. You're going to want to use this big one and then a small one. And it's always nice to have a couple different shapes. So I'm going to trim a little bit slower than I would a cup or a bowl just because of the size. All these trimmings need to be saved. Okay. because we can recycle those. Okay. So if I check my depth against this one on the, at least on the outside, I'm right there. So I have a lot more that I can go down. Okay. And we're really just trying to create a plate here that is, you know, sturdy, of course, but lightweight enough so that you're not picking up 50 pounds just to eat your dinner. And we'll check again. Okay, that's good. All right, so I'm gonna clean up the foot ring here, and then I'm gonna, at the end, I'm gonna take off the lugs and go real slow and try to clean up this edge here. But now I'm going to trim right here, and then I'm gonna figure out the height of my foot ring. I like to start with the round part. I think it just grabs more. And then I'll switch over to the square one. So like I said, it's really good if you trim at a soft leather hard so that it's not tacky. Because all of these trimmings, if this is too wet, they'll start reattaching themselves and it'll become a real pain. And your tool's gonna bounce over those reattached trimmings. You really just want them to fly off. Okay, so let's check. So I did actually go through my marker right there, but I can check it against the outside. That's good. I'm not gonna go down any farther. So now I'm gonna trim here. And once again, always checking. And the worst thing you can do is just trim through. The other thing about making sure that your plate is dry enough to trim, if this is still really soft, as you push down with your trim tool, you're actually going to bow out the middle of your plate. So that's really important to remember as well about trimming at the right consistency. All right, so let's check our depth. All right, a little bit more. So as you get better at throwing your plates, you can use less clay, and then you'll have to, you know, remove less through the trimming process. I think we're going to be good here. Yeah. Okay. So now if you think about it, because the plate, you know, if we flip it over, we threw a plate that's kind of concave like this. So we don't want to trim this thickness all the way back. We kind of want to bring those two lines together because they're not exactly the same. So I'm going to slowly carve out, and I like doing it with the small loop tools, and when I get close to the point where I'm going to really look for a finished surface, then I'm actually going to switch tools and I will go to the large trim tool. And I've got something in my clay here. Wow, look at that. That's a rock. And this was, oh, this was a fresh bag of clay from the manufacturer. There's a chunk of something. Okay, and you can see that I'm getting closer to the same level. And the reason why I like to use this as much as I can, because you're only putting that amount of pressure down in one spot. Whereas if you're using this, you're really pushing that pressure across a larger area, so you might cause things to bow a little bit more than if you were using the smaller tool. So now I'm flipping over and working with the flat edge and trying to get as close as I can to a level floor, and then I'll finish with that large one. So that's quite a lot of clay that I've removed. All right, so let's switch and try to get a nice smooth surface here. Okay. And I can already start to kind of feel I'm getting thinner and it's starting to dip a little bit. So I want to be careful with that. All right, now I'm gonna come back to my foot ring and really kind of clean it up, thin it out a little bit. And level it off. And just like every other foot ring, you don't want to have sharp edges. You want to round it off just a little bit so that it doesn't chip on you every time you put it down. Okay. All right, so I'm happy with that. Okay, it's pretty level. There's a little bit of a groove here, but I'm gonna see if I can get that out by just burnishing. So I'm coming back with a damp sponge. I'm not really pressing hard, but now I'm going to come back with my fingertip and I'm pushing down the grit, I'm pushing down the grog and burnishing the surface. Okay? All right, so I'm good with that. Now I'm going to take off my lugs and I'm going to turn the wheel really slow so that I can try to get this hard edge to disappear. And then I'm going to come back with the sponge and burnish again. So once again, I'm going real slow. And I'm just trying to remove that hard edge. Okay, and now I'm going to come back with my sponge, hydrate it, and then burnish, pushing down the throwing lines and pushing down any grit or grog that's raised to the surface. Raised. Okay. All right. So you're going to give that, a hot 5 minutes so the surface water is gone before you flip it over so you don't make marks in your newly trimmed plate. Okay, and then you're going to go ahead and sign. All right. And that's trimming a plate. It's a lot lighter. Okay. I am going to push this down gently because as I trimmed, it kind of came down. And remember, when a plate fires, the center lifts up. So you always want to have a little bit of a bow in your plate because as it fires, that center is going to rise. And I'd rather it rise to level than rise to a dome. So I am going to push that down just a little bit. Make sure it's kind of level through the whole thing. Okay. And now we've got a funky plate because, like I said, I dropped it. I'm just getting rid of some of those marks from the table. There we go. And I'll come back again. And burnish to get rid of those marks. So when I dropped it, this was the original mark. So then I just kind of pushed it in a little bit more, added this one and added this one just to see, you know, just to make it a little bit more design or thoughtful. So we have, you know, a triangle, 3 points, whatever. And I guess it works good if you want. Please give me some more, right? But there you go, plate. Once again, we don't want this to crack as it dries, so we want to dry it over time. So loosely cover it with a little bit of air getting underneath and slowly let it dry over the course of days. Just because you're done trimming doesn't mean you just leave it out to dry, because you get a nice big crack right across the center. Okay? Take your time.